National budget reading that is anticipated on Thursday this week. Now, the national budget will be tabled this week in Parliament on Thursday, the largest budget ever in Kenya's history, standing at 3.6 trillion shillings. To give us a little more insight on this, let's now take a look at the allocations and how it has been made. So the total budget expected is 3.6 trillion shillings. The national government allocation is 1.93 trillion. Of course, that comes from that is data from the National Treasury. Let's look at the Consolidated Fund, which stands at 1.33 trillion shillings. Funding shortages and shortcomings in the funding. We hope that is going to be streamlined in this year's budget. So where will this money come from? 1.97 trillion will be attracted from taxes, from the VAT, from the excess duties and all that. And then loans and grants are expected to be to a tune of 1.63 trillion. This comes at a time when the country is, of course, struggling with loan issues and all that. And then KRA also expects to collect 835 billion shillings in terms of taxes. So those are just the brief numbers. What you need to know really in a snapshot of what to expect in this year's budget, as will be read by the Treasury CS, Ukur Yatani. Let's look at more numbers on that as we continue the coverage. So the value-added tax projections are expected to be at 472.9 billion Kenya shillings. There's that proposal in the floor of Parliament to have other goods that have been zero-rated, to be included in the 16% VAT. Of course, we'll see how that pans out. Parliament is yet to approve it, and then excise taxes projections are at 241 billion Kenya shillings. So that is it for the budget, the snapshot of the budget for this year's 2021-2022, 3.6 trillion. Treasury Ukur Yatani's second budget that will be he will be reading on the floor of Parliament, of course, at a time when the country has been going through a lot of, turmoil economically and all that. We want to continue with that story. So the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani will on Thursday afternoon spell out his tax and spending plans for the 3.6 trillion shillings budget for the year starting 2021 1st July. It includes a raft of new taxes and individuals and businesses meant to shore up revenues and kickstart the economy badly hit by COVID-19 pandemic. KTN's Brenda Kerubo reports.
The proposed tax changes are contained in the Finance Bill 2020, which has already been tabled in the National Assembly. They are in three broad classes: existing taxes that have been expanded, introduction of new taxes, and measures to enhance Kenya Revenue Authority's revenue collection efforts.
In terms of new taxes, there is introduction of excise duty on tobacco products, certain tobacco products that are inhalable, not necessarily combustible. We have also excise duty on jewelry. This is on imported jewelry that's been pegged at 10%. In terms of reintroduction of taxes, and some of these are really big ones, like the excise duty on betting activities. There's been an introduction of 20% excise duty. Also, excise duty on sweets, that is sugar confectionaries, as well as chocolates, which was also dropped in 2019, and this is for local manufacturers, but now it's being reintroduced in 2021.
We had looked at leveraging on the networks of businesses to extend the incentives. They never got there. So it's a case of just government reversing that strategy and saying, now rather than allowing businesses, extending the businesses with the expectation that they would then, the benefits would accrue down there, let's bring in the taxes into the consolidated fund or the national kitty, then we'd directly provide those services. Treasury
has made the tax changes to bridge a budget deficit estimated at 952.9 billion shillings in the financial year 2021-2022. Treasury data shows that KRA collected 1.19 trillion shillings in the 10 months to April, representing a 4% dip from 1.24 trillion shillings collected in a similar period last year.
We are moving from a position whereby the current financial year, the ordinary revenue is around 1.59 trillion shillings. and is expected to increase by 181 billion to 1.78 trillion in the next financial year. So obviously there's need of having some new tax streams or revenue measures, at least to be able to bridge that deficit.
Reduced revenue collections also exposes the country to more borrowing to finance the budget. Treasury plans to get loans of up to 530 billion shillings from domestic lenders and 399.9 billion shillings from foreign creditors.
So that the dilemma, which as any public policy expert or implementer of public policy in the area of public finance would be asking, how do you strike a balance between meeting the aspirations of the citizens and ensuring that you do not craft a tax policy that would not bring about expansion of the economy?
The proposed tax changes are contained in the Finance Bill 2020, which has already been tabled in the National Assembly. If approved by Parliament, they will take effect on the 1st of July. Brenda Kirubo, KTN News.
All right, we still continue with our discussions of the national budget 2021-2022, and now joining me in studio is Mr. Churchill Ogutu. He is the head of research at Genghis Capital. Of course, he is no guest here, been quite a regular on our panels, not just in Business Today, but even in other shows. Good to have you in studio, Churchill.
Thanks, Brian, for having me today.
All right, so let's dive right into it. 3.6 trillion budget, one of the biggest in Kenya's history, really. Think about it. The ambassador is in a catch-22 situation, if you may. So what are the appropriations? How is it going to be allocated, and what projects are going to be given priority?
I like how you've put it, one of the biggest or the biggest budget we've ever seen. But there's some deja vu in it, because each and every financial year we find that the budget is usually at a historic high. So we've been doing budgets that are going higher and higher each financial year. But having said that, looking at the budget, as you had actually earlier on captured, looking at the allocations to the national government, we are seeing close to 1.96 trillion shillings that is going to the national government. That is both the executive, judiciary, and legislative. There's that allocation to the consolidated fund services, 1.33 trillion. The lion's share is now to public debt servicing costs, around 1.17 trillion. And then the equitable revenue share at around 370 billion shillings. But having said that, what will actually be tabled by the CS for Treasury will be the budgetary allocation to the national government. That is the 1.96 trillion shillings.
Great. I love that you've mentioned about the debt issue, and you've sort of preempted my next question, but I want you to pair it closely with how we are planning to, finance this budget. We still have a deficit. KRA is somewhat struggling to meet the revenue targets. Of course, we are coming from a battered economy, facing turmoils and all that. In terms of financing the deficit, because there's a big chunk that needs to be financed by debt, do we still have headroom to get more debt, and is it appropriate for this time?
Yes, and perhaps I didn't even mention it earlier. Looking at where the budget expenditure estimates is at 3.6 trillion shillings. And then in terms of revenue, ordinary revenue, which is expected to go up by 181 billion, already is a bit ambitious in this kind of environment, but that is also underpinned by ambitious growth estimates. Remember that even from where Treasury is sitting at, in the current financial year, the average growth that they are looking at is around 3.8%. This is expected to go up to 6.3%, and that is giving them some convictions that even the current tax measures that are going on, be it corporate tax, be pay as you earn, be value-added tax, the current measures will still be higher than what is being collected in the current financial year. So that's one. And of course, the other angle to it is now the Finance Bill 2021, the proposals. So that is now getting into this ordinary revenue target to 1.78 trillion. Of course, we have the ministerial appropriation in aid. Basically, appropriation in aid is the the fees that are collected by the state-owned operations. Think of universities or think universities which are running the parallel program. So those kind of fees goes into AIAs. Think of national game parks, the kind of fees you get if you go to a game park. So that gets into the AIAs. So we are looking at 263 billion in the next financial year. So of course, that deficit, if you sum up the revenues and together with the grants, which is around 62 billion, so it's coming collectively to 2.1 trillion. So there's a deficit of 1.6 trillion. Of course, there's that element of refinancing the debt that are due to mature in the next financial year. So that leaves us with net financing at 953 billion. So it starts with the budget. If you have a slightly lower budget, we can now be able to reduce even the financing needs in the next financial year.
As we bring this conversation to a close, there's the proposals in the finance bill of 2021, I beg your pardon. Like a 6-year-old child, could you please just break it down for me so that we understand it? What is contained in the finance bill of 2021 and what are some of the proposals there?
Well, there are some different proposals now touching on different tax legislations. One of them touching on the Income Tax Act. And one of the things that caught my eye is now this proposal that will now be able to remove these tax laws that is applicable to those companies that have been having losses. So the current law as it is that you can be able to have tax loss, the losses. Okay. And then you are not paying tax for a period of 10 years. But because we are in the regime of the minimum tax, whereby it's slapping a 1% minimum tax on your turnover. So that means that there's no need of having that tax loss going forward. So that has been proposed to be repealed. I don't know now because minimum tax is still under court hearing. I don't know whether they'll bring it back, but as it is currently, it's supposed to be removed. Getting into the personal income tax, there's a proposal at least to ensure that the contribution to the NHIF are scaled up. The thing is that now you'll get some tax relief on your contributions to NHIF to a maximum of, they're looking at 15%. And NHIF contributions on a monthly basis, that's 1,700. So you're looking at 255 shillings tax relief by the virtue of now contributing to NHIF. So the goal with that is at least to ensure that people contribute more to the NHIF, at least perhaps to be able to get some funds for the universal health care. Getting into the value-added tax, there are a number of proposals. Some of them are to remove the zero-rated goods from that bracket into standard rating. Others are now to remove some goods and put them into tax exempt status. The one that caught our eyes is about ordinary bread, which was under zero rated. It's being proposed to be repealed from zero rated status, and it could now get into the tax exempt status. So I know there'll be a bit of some hullabaloo. Having said that, even as we discuss these finance proposals, this is in parentheses, I'm looking at the Finance and National Planning Committee. This is the committee in Parliament that is tasked to look at the finance bill and give its recommendation. So Parliament right now has been on recess. It's expected to come back tomorrow. And one of the things that will be in its entry is this report by this particular committee, its recommendation on the finance bill. And I can bet I have a white horse. I can bet my white horse that this particular proposal dealing with ordinary bread might not see the light of day. So that's one of the things. We've seen a lot of hullabaloo around this particular proposal. So let me just stop it there. There are a number of things, but...
I wish we had more time, Churchill.